In a single year, one man was paid about $550 million. He built an empire out of the kind of debt the rest of Wall Street dismissed as garbage. Then he went to prison. Decades later, a president erased the punishment with a stroke of a pen. So what was Michael Milken really? A genius the system feared, or the face of its greed? There are a handful of people the world can never quite make up its mind about. Michael Milken is one of them. Ask the people who admire him, and you will hear about a misunderstood genius. The man who pried open the doors of capital for companies the big banks had locked out, who financed jobs and growth in whole industries that did not yet exist, who was then hunted down and made an example of, they say, for the crime of winning too much. Ask the people who can stand him, and you will hear the exact opposite. They will tell you he is the clearest symbol the 1980s ever produced, a decade of greed handed a human face. A man who bent the rules of the market until they snapped, paid himself more than anyone in history, and then strolled away with a presidential pardon and most of his fortune still intact. Here is the strange part. Almost everything in both of those portraits is true at the same time. This is the story of how a kid from the suburbs of Los Angeles, working at a desk most Americans had never heard of, turned himself into the most powerful financier in the country. In 1 year, he was paid more than entire corporations earned in profit. It is the story of the idea that made him. A simple, almost obvious insight about debt that an entire industry had somehow walked straight past. It is also the story of the line he eventually crossed, the place where that genius curdled into 6 felony counts. And it is the story of a question that has never really been settled. Not by the courts, not by his money, not even by a pardon. Was Michael Milken a builder the system punished for being too good at the game? Or a criminal the system was simply rich enough to forgive? By the end of this, you are going to have to decide for yourself. To understand the man, you first have to understand the idea, because the idea came first, and almost everything else grew out of it. Picture the bond market in the early 1970s. A bond is just a loan. A company borrows money from investors and promises to pay it back, with interest over time. Every bond gets a grade, like a student, from the big rating agencies. The safe, established blue-chip companies earn the top marks, investment grade. Their debt is treated like gold, and everyone wants to hold it. Below a certain line sit all the other bonds. The debt of smaller companies, younger companies, companies that had stumbled once and still carried the scar, below investment grade. The market had a colder word for those, junk. And the word did real damage. Calling a company's debt junk was not just an insult, it was closer to a sentence. It told every cautious investor, every pension fund, every bank to stay well away. The label became the reality. A company branded junk could not raise money, and a company that cannot raise money struggles to grow, which makes it look even riskier than before. The fear fed on itself. The rule on Wall Street was practically carved in stone. Respectable money does not touch junk. It is too risky. Those companies default, you lose your shirt, end of conversation. So the capital that growing businesses needed most simply was not there for them. The door was shut with a polite little sign on it that said, "Not for you." So the rule carried a quiet cruelty inside it. The biggest, safest companies, the ones that needed help least, could borrow all day long at the cheapest rates in the world. The smaller, hungrier companies, the ones a loan might actually transform, were left standing out in the cold. Money flowed toward the people who already had it and away from the people who did not. That was simply how the system worked, and almost nobody thought to ask whether it had to work that way. Milken studied this same despised corner of the market as a young man, and he noticed something everyone else had filed away as obvious and never bothered to question. He pointed to research suggesting that a basket of these low-rated bonds, held together as a group, actually paid investors more than enough to cover the handful that went bad. Yes, some would default, but the high interest on all the rest more than made up the difference. Priced for fear, the whole category was quietly a bargain. Sit with how large that thought is. The entire market had agreed, without really checking, that junk was something to run from. Milken's claim was that the label itself was wrong, that the fear was overpriced, and that buried inside all that fear was an enormous, untapped opportunity just sitting there in plain sight. Then he took the second step, the one that turned a clever observation into an empire. If these bonds were a good deal for the people buying them, he could do something nobody else was willing to do. He could help the shut-out companies, the strivers, and the upstarts the blue-chip banks ignored, raise real money by issuing exactly this kind of high-yield debt. He could open the door that had been closed for so long. What did that actually mean for an ordinary company? A cable startup, a fledgling airline, a manufacturer with a solid plan and no pedigree. The kind of business a traditional bank would wave away at the door. Through Milken, that company could suddenly borrow the money to build, to hire, to grow. For the people who believed in him, this was the whole point. He was not gaming the system. He was widening it, letting in the strivers the old club had kept out on purpose. He built the operation inside an investment bank called Drexel Burnham Lambert, not one of the white shoe giants, a scrappier, second-tier firm, the kind that had to try harder to get noticed. In time, he moved the whole high-yield machine clear across the country, from New York out to Beverly Hills, California, and ran it from a now legendary X-shaped trading desk, often arriving before dawn so he would be awake when the New York markets opened. That distance was its own kind of statement. He was not sitting at the center of the old establishment, waiting politely to be let in. He was building a rival one, 3,000 miles away, around an idea the rest of Wall Street had been too proud or too frightened to pick up. For a good while, the idea worked the way only the best ideas do. Companies that could never have gotten a loan suddenly could. Some of them grew into giants. The high-yield bonds Milken arranged helped finance a wave of new businesses that went on to reshape how Americans lived and worked. The door was open, and the money came pouring through it. If the story had stopped at that exact moment, Milken would be remembered as a pure financial visionary, a man who found money where everyone else saw only risk. But a tool this powerful does not stay in one set of hands or get used for only one purpose. The same machine that funded the upstarts could fund something else entirely, and it did. What Milken built next went well beyond a business. It was closer to a kingdom, and for most of the 1980s, he sat squarely at the center of it. The high-yield market he had championed exploded. Over the decade, it swelled from a forgotten corner of finance into a market worth well over $100 billion, and Milken was its undisputed king. If you wanted to raise serious money outside the old club, there was one road, and it ran through Beverly Hills, through him. This is where the story stops being only about plucky underdogs getting a fair shot, because that same flood of money became the fuel for the defining drama of the decade, the corporate takeover. In the old world, if you wanted to swallow a giant company, you had to already be a giant yourself. You needed cash you simply did not have. Milken changed the arithmetic. He could raise vast sums of debt fast and hand a relatively small player the firepower to go after a much larger one. The hunter no longer had to be bigger than its prey. It just had to be able to get Milken on the phone. His firm even perfected a single sheet of paper that could put a chill through any boardroom in America. It was a letter stating that Drexel was, in its own words, highly confident it could raise the money for a given takeover. Not a guarantee, just confidence. Yet coming from Milken, the market treated that letter as good as cash in hand. A corporate raider could wave it at a sleeping giant, and suddenly no company in the country felt too big to become a target. You have to understand how that felt to the people running America's biggest companies. For generations, the largest corporations had seemed untouchable, too vast and too expensive for anyone to seriously threaten. Now a far smaller rival, armed with Milken's money, could come for them almost overnight. Chief executives watched their own stock the way you watch a storm rolling in. Milken had not just opened a door, he had handed out keys to the whole neighborhood. Once a year, the powerful and the ambitious flew out to California to gather around him, to raise money and strike deals on a scale the old Wall Street could barely picture. For a few days, the true center of American finance was not some marble tower in Manhattan. It was wherever Michael Milken happened to be standing. No single financier had ever loomed this large over the American economy, and history tends to repeat one lesson about anyone who climbs that high, that fast, and that visibly. Sooner or later, the climb itself becomes the target. Supporters saw this as the market doing exactly what a market is supposed to do, shaking the dust off lazy, bloated companies, forcing complacent managers to either perform or step aside for someone who would. Critics saw something far darker, a wave of debt-fueled raids that buried great companies under mountains of borrowing, broke some of them apart for scrap, and cost ordinary people their jobs, all to enrich a handful of financiers standing in the middle. They were watching the very same events. They just could not agree on what they were looking at. What made the fight so bitter is that the stakes were real on both sides. Real companies were built with this money, companies that had been frozen out for years, and real workers found themselves on the wrong end of a buyout, told the factory was being sold or shut to help pay down a mountain of fresh debt. The same engine that created opportunity for some created wreckage for others. Where a person landed on Michael Milken often came down to which end of that engine they happened to be standing at. In the middle of all of it sat the money. Milken's personal fortune in these years is almost hard to say out loud. In one single year, 1987, his pay was reported at around $550 million. Not his firm's haul. His. At the time, it was the largest annual sum anyone in America had ever been recorded earning. Put it in plain terms, in a single year, one financier was paid a sum that most successful companies would need a decade to earn. Not a corporation, not a bank. One person. Money like that does not just buy houses and planes, it buys influence, access, and the benefit of the doubt. It also paints a very large target on your back. Try to actually hold that number in your head. By some measures, he was personally earning more than the entire companies he was financing. More in a year than household name corporations booked in profit. One man at one desk on the wrong coast for Wall Street had turned himself into a financial superpower. Almost nobody outside his own operation truly understood how it all fit together. The web of buyers and sellers, the favors, the timing, the financing, lived largely inside one brilliant head and the tight circle around it. That was the engine of his power. It would also, before very long, become the source of his danger. The more indispensable he made himself, the more there was for someone to investigate. Power on that scale attracts two things at the same moment: imitators and investigators. Wall Street had never watched anyone gather this much control over the flow of money this fast. To a lot of powerful people, the rivals he had beaten, the executives he had cornered, the regulators watching the takeover wars from Washington, Milken no longer looked like a hero flinging doors open. He looked like a man who had simply become too powerful, operating inside a market only he fully understood. When you are the one who designed the game and you are winning it by margins nobody has ever posted before, people stop asking how you got so good. They start asking whether you are playing it straight. And in the second half of the 1980s, the government began asking that question out loud. What investigators suspected was not that Milken had backed the wrong companies. It was that somewhere in the blizzard of deals, he had stopped bending the rules and started breaking them. Proving that would take a witness from the inside, someone who had sat close enough to see. In 1986, the government found exactly that. Every empire seems to have a single thread that, once it is pulled, unravels the whole thing. For Milken, that thread had a name: Ivan Boesky. Boesky was a famous Wall Street speculator, an arbitrageur who made his fortune betting on corporate takeovers, the very deals Milken's money helped set in motion. In 1986, Boesky was caught in a securities fraud scandal of his own. Facing his own ruin, he did what cornered men so often do. He cooperated. He started handing the government other names, and one of the names he gave them was Michael Milken. Boesky's cooperation pointed investigators toward a tangle of dealings between the two men. Arrangements where, the government would allege, the true ownership of stock had been hidden, where favors were quietly traded, where the disclosures the law requires had been quietly falsified. The genius of the open door prosecutors suspected had a hidden room tucked in behind it. These were never going to be simple cases to make. The deals at the heart of them were fiendishly complex, layered through company after company and account after account, the kind of thing that took trained investigators years just to map out. That complexity cut both ways. It made real wrongdoing genuinely hard to prove. It also made almost anything look suspicious to outsiders who could not follow the trail through the maze. For 2 years, the investigation ground forward, one of the largest securities fraud probes the country had ever launched. Then in 1989, it landed with full force. A federal grand jury handed up a 98-count indictment against Michael Milken. 98 counts. Many of them were brought under a law called RICO, a racketeering statute originally written to dismantle the mafia, now aimed squarely at a financier in Beverly Hills. Racketeering, securities fraud, mail fraud, insider trading, stock parking, tax violations. Prosecutors signaled they would try to strip away well over $1 billion. Hold on right here, because this is the exact spot where the headlines blur the truth and the difference matters. Those 98 counts were charges, accusations. They were not findings, and they were not a verdict. The government had accused him of all of it. It had proven none of it because the case never reached a jury. The pressure on him in that moment is hard to overstate. A trial under RICO could have meant decades behind bars and the seizure of nearly everything he owned. A plea would cap the damage, but it would force him to stand up in open court and admit out loud that he was a felon. Whatever that choice was, it was not made from a position of strength. In April of 1990, Michael Milken made a choice. He chose not to fight it out at trial. He pleaded guilty, but the precise shape of that plea is the thing you have to get exactly right. He did not plead guilty to 98 counts. He pleaded guilty to 6. 6 felony counts: securities and reporting violations, conspiracy, mail fraud, and a tax count, and several of them tied to those concealed ownership dealings with Boesky. Now notice what is not on that list. He did not plead guilty to racketeering. He did not plead guilty to a standalone charge of insider trading. The RICO count and the other 92 counts were dropped. Why does that distinction still matter all these years later? Because almost everyone half remembers this story wrong. They picture a courtroom showdown, a guilty verdict, a Wall Street villain branded a racketeer, and an inside trader by a jury. None of that happened. There was no trial and no verdict. He was charged with those things, yes, but the deal he actually made was an admission to 6 specific felonies, and racketeering was not one of them. The towering rest of that indictment quietly disappeared. That gap has fueled the argument ever since. Critics look at the 6 counts and see real crimes, a flat admission that the king had cheated. His defenders look at the same 6 counts and see the reverse. Proof, they argue, that after the biggest securities investigation in the nation's history, with everything imaginable on the line, the government could only get Milken to admit to a narrow set of technical, regulatory offenses. Nothing remotely like the racketeering empire the indictment had screamed about. The punishment, though, was entirely real. The financial penalty came to about $600 million, a record at the time, split between a fine of $200 million and a $400 million fund to compensate those who had been harmed. He was barred for the rest of his life from the securities industry he had just spent a decade ruling. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. 10 years. The king of Wall Street was going to prison for a decade, except he wasn't. The sentence was later cut down after he cooperated with prosecutors in other cases and earned credit for good behavior. In the end, Michael Milken served about 2 years. To one side, 2 years was a slap on the wrist, more proof that the powerful never really pay. To the other, the punishment had been crushing no matter how many months he spent inside. A record fine, a ruined name, permanent exile from the only work he had ever wanted to do. Even his sentence, like everything else about the man, split the room. So the man who had earned $550 million in a single year walked out of a minimum security prison camp in the early 1990s. Banned from his own industry, a convicted felon, his name welded forever to the excesses of a decade. The story could have ended right there, as a tidy little morality tale. The greedy man climbed too high, and the greedy man fell. It did not end there, because almost the moment he was free, two things happened, one after the other, that would scramble the verdict on Michael Milken for the rest of his life. The first was a death sentence of a different kind. Soon after his release, Milken was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. It had already spread. The prognosis he was reportedly given was measured not in years, but in months. Here, the story takes the turn that makes it so genuinely hard to judge. Faced with his own mortality, Milken threw his fortune and his ferocious energy straight at the disease. He founded what became the Prostate Cancer Foundation, which grew into the largest private funder of prostate cancer research in the world. He had already created the Milken Institute, an economic think tank that still carries his name. The man the government had branded the face of greed reinvented himself as one of the most significant medical philanthropists in America. And the cancer that was supposed to kill him inside a year, decades later, he is still alive. The scale of that second act is genuinely hard to overstate. The same drive that had once cornered the bond market was now aimed at cancer research, at the scientists who could not get funded anywhere else. In a strange way, it was the junk bond insight all over again. Find the thing the establishment has written off and pour everything into it. Only this time, the payoff was measured not in money, but in years of human life. So which one is the real Michael Milken? The felon who paid a record fine, or the philanthropist whose money has helped extend countless lives? The honest answer is the uncomfortable one. He is both at the same time. And that is exactly what makes the final chapter detonate the way it does. Because the second thing arrived in February of 2020. President Donald Trump granted Michael Milken a full pardon. The White House statement praised his decades of philanthropy and described his offenses as novel. Technical and regulatory violations, it said, of a kind that had rarely, if ever, been charged as crimes before. It listed a long roster of powerful people who had pushed for the pardon: financiers, media moguls, political heavyweights. After 30 years, the establishment had not merely forgiven Michael Milken. Parts of it had spent years actively lobbying to clear his name. By then, he was no longer just a disgraced financier. He was a major philanthropist, a man who convened presidents and chief executives, whose name sat on a respected think tank and a leading medical charity. So the pardon did not fall out of a clear sky. It was the result of a long, patient, well-funded campaign to reshape how the world remembered him. Whether that campaign was a search for justice or a quiet purchase of it is precisely the thing people cannot agree on. It is worth being very clear about what a pardon is and what it is not. A pardon is forgiveness. It is the government choosing to set aside the punishment. What it is not is a declaration of innocence. It does not erase the guilty plea. It does not say the 6 felonies never happened. Michael Milken pleaded guilty, and in the eyes of the law, that remains true to this day. The pardon forgave the crime. It did not undo it. There was one more thing the pardon never touched: the lifetime ban from the securities industry, the regulator's judgment that he could never again work in the business he had transformed, stayed exactly where it was, forgiven by a president, still barred by the regulators. Even at the very end, the verdict on Michael Milken came back split right down the middle. So you can start to see why he is a man the world cannot settle on. To his defenders, the pardon was simple justice, a long overdue correction for a man who had been scapegoated, who had paid his price many times over, and who had spent the decades since doing extraordinary good. To his critics, the pardon was the most fitting ending a story about money and power could possibly have. Proof that in America, if you are rich enough, connected enough, and generous enough for long enough, even a record-setting financial conviction can, in the end, simply be wiped off the board. Two opposite readings of the very same act of mercy. The unsettling thing is that neither one of them is simply wrong. In the end, the hardest thing about Michael Milken is that he refuses to fit the shape we want to force him into. We like our financial villains to be plainly villains, and our geniuses to come out clean. He is neither, and he is somehow both. He really did see something true that an entire market had missed. And that insight really did open up capital to companies that had been locked out of it. He really did plead guilty to 6 felonies, pay a record penalty, and lose his industry for the rest of his life. The builder and the convict are the very same person, and you do not get to keep only the half of him you happen to like. There is a strong temptation, watching all this, to just pick the version that flatters what you already believe and stop there. The hero punished by jealous regulators, the crook bailed out by his powerful friends. But the facts are stubborn and they refuse to line up neatly behind either flag. Maybe that is the real lesson buried in all of this. Not a lesson about bonds, but a lesson about us, about how we decide as a society who gets punished and who gets forgiven. A poorer man with a smaller fortune and fewer powerful friends does not get a foundation, a comeback, and a presidential pardon. Milken's genius was real. So was the machinery of wealth and influence that, in the end, softened nearly every consequence the system tried to bring down on him. Every part of this story has 2 endings stacked on top of each other: a record fortune and a record fine, a 10-year sentence and 2 short years served, a lifetime ban and a presidential pardon. A man told he had months to live, still here decades later. At every single fork, the story refuses to hand you the clean answer you were reaching for. So we are going to do something we almost never do. We are going to leave the verdict with you. You have heard what he built, and you have heard what he admitted to. You have heard about the record fine, the lifetime ban, the cancer, the billions given away, and the pardon that forgave the crime without ever erasing it. Genius the system punished for winning, or a criminal the system was rich enough to forgive? So tell us your verdict. If you think you know what Michael Milken really was, genius, criminal, or some impossible mix of the two, hit like to cast your vote and drop your reasoning in the comments. It is the one ruling in this whole case that is still completely up for grabs. Then subscribe, because next time we open another story where the line between brilliance and crime turns out to be far thinner than anyone wants to admit.